for my mom. And second thing, about this building. So I'll introduce myself in a second. I'm doing 1 day a year at MMUBS, Manchester Metropolitan University Business School. And a couple of years they went to this fantastic building, and also Brain, excellent or whatever. But they had one big issue. So they had all the technology in the building and storing the heat and everything, etc. One big issue, and those were the kettles for boiling your tea water. Right? Do you have that here? So the idea was, because actually they take up a lot of heat and a lot of waste heat, because you put them on, it boils, you get on the phone, say, ah, shoot, okay, so you go back, put them on again, there's almost too much water, more water than you need. So these things are rather inefficient in terms of technology use. So they thought what we need to do is take the kettles away. Now try to tell a group of 300-400 academics that you're professors that you're going to take their kettle away. So that project manager was hated. That was a lady, by the way. So, and she said, no, I'm going to give you something back. So we got the cooker, you know, the thing that is on the somewhere in the pantries, and it gives you the boiling water and it's everything okay. It lasted 2 years. So actually they had to put in the kettle police to make sure that the kettles were not returning. To be frank, after 3 years they gave up. So it is, you know, project is not about the technology. Project is about people. I think this is about, if you want to have a green building, it's people behavior. My name is Gilbert Silvius. I'm working, so I'm professor at LOI University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And for the rest, I'm kind of a contracted lecturer on many different universities. And my background, or no, not my, let's say my first academic affiliation, so you see a lot of logos here. My first one was HU, oh, this is great. HU, University of Applied Sciences. And that's a little bit where my story with sustainability and project management starts. At first, for me, project management, I come from practice. Project management was something you don't talk about, you do. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. So let's just do it. And after a while, I started, okay, perhaps there's a little bit more to this. And we had an idea to develop a Master of Science program in project management, actually the first one in the Netherlands. And that's, that idea came about in 2008, 2007, 2008, and we started kind of developing. And with industry, people from industry, and we're sitting around the table. And of course, if you are building a program, the curriculum on project management, there are standards. There's PMI, IPMA, books, everything you can do on processes and on project management. And then we thought, okay, but a program needs to have a soul. There needs to be a message in the program. It's not just, you know, the ICB 3 set of competences or whatever. And through some stroke of whatever, we decided that should be sustainability. And that had to do with that we thought projects were more and more oriented towards the context of whatever they're doing, and the context should be moving towards sustainability. So we started the idea of sustainability in project management. And we were picking up, so we had a module in the program on sustainability in project management. And when we really needed to start development, everyone was picking up the post-its with the modules on that. And this was the one that remained on the table because nobody had a clue. And I said, well, I'll pick it up. I also don't have a clue, but I've been a consultant, and consultants are trained to talk about things that they don't have a clue about. So I'm okay with it. And we just took it from there. And I think it was actually 1 year later, I met Darren, and 2 years later, I gave him a proposal. I said, why don't, you're doing this set of books, right, with Gower at that time. And so I would like to write a book on sustainability in project management. I didn't dare at that moment to call it sustainable project management. What would have been a better term? And we wrote a book about it. That actually became this book. Yeah, and things took off from there. So let me take you a little bit on, because you asked, where are we? Well, we are in Bournemouth. Let's give you some thoughts. So a very simple thinking in developing that program was the logic we saw: sustainability needs change, and change is organized in projects. Not suggesting that all change is organized in projects. No, I don't think that's true in organizations and society. There is many change that's not organized in projects. But I can't imagine of many projects that do not involve a change component, that actually do not mean anything or do not imply some kind of change. So we thought, okay, and stability needs change. I don't think we need to explain that. So that was a logic we saw. I said, well, if that's a kind of logic, wouldn't it make sense that sustainability also means something for project management, for the way we do projects? And I think now, that was 2008, looking 10 years back, I think we have seen a couple of people that completely agree with that. For example, Peter Morris, and no doubt you know this report or you've seen it. Peter Morris, climate. Sorry, I need to sometimes look back because you don't have the cheat screen in front of you. So, climate change and what the project management profession should be doing about it. Hey, sure, of course. Why didn't we think of that before? We can't be ignorant to the largest issues we have in society. Apart from that, let's say some politicians are ignorant. That's their job. But we can't be ignorant to that. The things we are doing, project management, the project management profession is doing, has to do with change. So let's look at some of the challenges that we have. So I thought that's a great report. I'm not always, what I'm interested in is how it changes project management. So you can look at sustainability. Let's take the word sustainability for a second. Stability in projects is the management of green projects. That was where we started. So we started talking about sustainability in project management. We would come into a company and they would think, okay, what kind of nice sustainable project do we have? You want to talk about that? So no. If I look at sustainability in projects, you can talk, okay, it's about the delivery, so or management or governance of the project, so the process of the project, or it's about the deliverable. The thing we are making in the end. Well, that would be, if that's, let's say, sustainable, I don't like the word green too much, but it's kind of snappy. So management of green project, but no. What we were interested in and still interested in is the sustainable management of all projects. And that doesn't mean that only this is green. Sustainable management means they are both green. So they're both more sustainable. You can't really split them. We've seen that in a couple of publications. So for me, sustainability project management is not only about having the sustainable outcome or output of the project. I have to be careful with the word output, but it's also the process of reaching that output and delivering and managing and governing that output that we also should make sustainable. That's what's let's say my curiosity. And that's not easy, because if you think about all kinds of concepts of sustainable development and sustainability, and you think about project management, they are not what we call natural friends. And actually this model I took from a publication that's not even published yet. This one is published, but I saw it in a paper for the Academy of Management next August, next month, by Alex Hope. And actually he took some inspiration from a small table in one of our books. But if you compare the concepts on one side, in the sustainable development side, the concept of project management, it's very hard to combine those. So you really have to think hard, how does it actually fit together? Because it doesn't fit together that well. People plan profit, I'm a triangle, doesn't sound like the same. Okay, it's kind of triangle stuff. Short term, long term, etc. So we started writing about it, and we were not the only ones. That was great. Unfortunately, these guys beat us to the market, and you have to give it to the Americans that the green project management was actually the snappier title. So Monsman and Shirley, we came a little bit later. This one was actually a PMI sponsored research project that came out a little bit later from the Austrian community, Martin Ueman and Roland Kares at that point. This was an edited book we published a little bit later. This one, Tom Taylor, you probably know this one, Sustainability Interventions for Managers of Projects and Programs. I think Tom Taylor is a pretty familiar name here. Not so academic, but kind of very attractive, light, cool, a very accessible publication. And we have the guys from Green Project Management. This is the latest one. They call it now Sustainable Project Management. You may have heard about PRISM, Project Integrated Sustainable Management, Sustainability Management, things like that. So Joel Carboni and his crew are trying to create a methodology and certifications about, you could say, about Green Project Management, so greenprojectmanagement.org. So some more publications were coming out, and I think we've seen it also in some other things. Also, the academic work starts. There have been a couple of literature reviews published, and they all show kind of this type of picture. I mean, we still can say that 75% of all publications on the topic were published in the last 5 years. And actually, this one is taken. I think this one is taken from a literature review that we did in 2014. So we included lots of publications, also conference papers and stuff like that. And this was only 4 journals. So it's not, the numbers are not that high, but they're kind of 4 leading journals. And I could say, let's say also the most, let's say the highest level academic journal is now picking up the topic. We talked about, at that time, Rodney Turner of the International Journal of Project Management about making a special issue of that already years ago. And he said, nah, it's not developed enough. But we got it. After a while, so Martina, Eamon and I edited a special issue of the International Journal. So you could say the topic is really picking up now. That was published last year. And I think the development of the topic, also its thinking is really, it's now accepted that we move away from the management of green projects or sustainable projects, sustainability projects, to sustainable management of all projects. Which we define. I mean, you have to, certainly academically, you have to find some kind of definition. And for me, a definition is a one-liner. So on one moment we said, let's try to define this, because in all those publications, it's very weakly defined. So we try to make a definition. You could say, okay, it's a one-liner, all right, but it's a long one-liner. True, it is. So my apologies for that. But there are a couple of thoughts in there that perhaps makes it a little bit more accessible. The idea would be that sustainable project management is the planning, monitoring, and controlling of project delivery and support processes. Now, for what's the word, that's our definition of project management. But then we have a couple of extra considerations. And the considerations are about the triple bottom line. It is about having the people, planet, profit perspective, environmental, economic, and social aspect of the life cycle, the project deliverable and effects, but also the resources. So we take that very expanded, you could say, life cycle perspective there. There are a couple of things on stakeholders that always come back. So aimed at realizing benefits for stakeholders, not only, let's say, the business case for the sponsor or the owner, no, benefits for stakeholders. That includes proactive stakeholder participation. So it's not only the output that needs to bring some benefits to stakeholders, it's also the way we engage stakeholders in the process. So coming back to the process. Another aspect to the process, performed in a transparent, fair and ethical way. There's some value aspect there with transparency and accountability. So we try to start working on kind of defining that, what we consider that. And I'm very happy that where actually we had to write, in the early years we had to write, okay, all these standards, they basically don't talk about sustainability. But if you look at the latest standards, so this one is published, the ICB 4 published, I think 2015, being implemented now in most countries last year. I think Holland was one of the first countries there. That talks about, as one of the competencies, identify and ensure that the project complies with relevant sustainability principles and objectives. And the measures is that we expect that the project management professional, so project manager for example, is able to assess the impact of the project on the environment and society, identifies social and environmental consequences, defines and communicates sustainability targets for the project and its outcomes. I was amazed when I saw this. It was great, fantastic. Now I'm really curious how they're going to implement that. Okay, that's the next step. So, but something's moving there. And also ISO. Now the ISO standards on project management have not picked up that much, but they're more or less having an indirect effect. So PMI and IPMA are also looking a little bit at those ISO developments and say, what are they doing? So we had that ISO standard on project management, not very impressive. That portfolio management, okay. Program management, and then they have the standard on governance of project programs and portfolios, published last year. And it's one of the principles of governance, so it defines not a lot of process, but a couple of principles. And one is sustainability and ethics. The governance of projects and programs and portfolios should reflect the organization's commitment to ethical values and sustainability. Okay, that's something, and they mention a couple of other things. So we see it kind of being picked up now also by standards. How that reflects to practice, that will be the next step. Of course, your question will probably be, how about PMI? Not really, but let's see. And it always takes a little bit more time. Now, but today is about RPM. It's not about SPM. It's about responsible project management. And to be frank, I start using the word responsible a little bit, but don't really know what it is. So I said, well, is that perhaps the next step? And it may be the better word, because there is a little bit of inflation in the word sustainability. Yeah, people start getting a little bit tired of it, and I don't think we should care too much about it, but still, you want it to be inspirational also. So I like the word responsible. And what would it mean? Because if you look at on the company level, you see that CSR, or social responsibility, and sustainability kind of are mingling a little bit. It's not the same thing, but in social responsibility is the responsibility for organizations to contribute to a more sustainable development. So they are in a way related to that. So social responsible, cautious or pre-cautious, that's also sometimes a value that's attached to that. Sustainable, ethical, of course, transparent, accountable, we had those already, no harm, inclusive. A couple of things, it may not be too far away there. So I'm going to get back to sustainability in a second, but it may not be too far away. I've added one word, professional. And I added the word professional because if you look at, here comes PMI, the PMI and IPMA both have a code of ethics and professional conduct. And interestingly enough, this one was published in 2010, already talks about, as practitioners of project management, we are committed of doing what is right and honorable. I love that. That's great. And it starts about talking about values, including, here it is, responsibility. Hey, so we should say, we should already know what's that. We should be practicing that, or practicing that. We make, well, what it means, these kind of statements. Very close to what we saw earlier. Same thing, I'm not going to go over all the standards, but IPMA also has a quite extensive code of ethics and professional conduct, published a couple of years later. Also talks about the responsibility towards the wider society and the responsibility on sustainability and nature environment. So professionalism, ethics, responsibility, care for sustainability seems to kind of, I don't want to make it one big cloud, word cloud, but there are definitely connections there. And I like the connection also to professionalism. I think if we can get it in there and get it in the minds of the project manager, of our target group, then we might be getting somewhere. So going back to sustainability, sustainable management of all projects. Now, putting that in the minds, for me, in the end, I'm a pretty pragmatic guy, means I need to see it in behavior.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi.
That's the next.
Oh, sorry.
I put him on mute, but apparently he's not so muted. I just I just send him a quick message. Where are we?
Well, you can mute his microphone's over here.
15. Okay, cool. Yeah, where's his microphone? I mute his microphone. I muted myself, haven't I? I mute him.
Yeah. Did you put it here?
Here, this one. All right, okay. Got it.
Don't know what he's doing.
He's clearly unmutable.
Okay.
I'll just kill the volume on this. That does it.
Yeah. Now, on the question of where are we, it's not so easy. But I started building up a little bit of a framework to understand, well, what do we now see happening in this whole cloud of sustainable project management. And keeping in mind that for me, in the end, it's about, I think in the end, it's about actions, behavior. We need to change something there. And I started building up this model. And it's not, it's not academic, it's not published, it's just a framework in my mind to understand to position certain publications also. So of course, if we start talking about sustainability in project management, you see a lot of academics and a lot of publications coming out on criteria. What are the criteria for sustainability? Most of them take a sustainable indicator framework like the GOI and then kind of apply that to projects. There's a little bit a problem that it's very difficult to put these indicators on the process. They're more applicable to the product, to the end thing you do there. So I put some publications here that you can have in the handout, but lots of on indicators there. If you want to put it on the level of the process, if you want to have more understanding of how to integrate sustainability in the process, indicators are a little bit more difficult. We tend to go to principles. And that one book that came from Austria, from the Vienna crew, they came in their publication with the idea of principles. And you see it also with the green project management. They refer a lot to the UN Global Compact, for example. UN Global Compact is also principles. Principles have the idea that they are more helping you towards the future, where indicators measure the past. So indicators are more easy to work with in the process. If you look at the process itself, yes, there is this green project management that basically describes a process, and specific documents like stability management plan, etc., how you would integrate it in the process. But you need to go a little bit deeper. And going deeper means, what does it really mean for how we work with stakeholders? And then it's actually Eskerot and Ueman do a lot of work with that. What does it mean in risk management? In the first years, lots of publications on how to integrate sustainability in your stakeholder engagement, nothing on risk management. Only 2 years ago, a book came out, now we got some first publication. Business case. Basically, you can go over all the processes, and I think all these knowledge areas, but also the different processes in different phases. What would it mean if I want to integrate these ideas on the concept of sustainability? What would it mean now? How to do that? So, yeah, some publications actually, well, a lot more than I show here. Do we have all the areas? No. A lot of attention for the stakeholders, a little bit for the risk, a little bit for the business case, but we can do a lot more there. And very little for the team, for example. Those kind of things. And then making it practical. Instruments. We need, if IPMA says, well, that's all great, but you need to be able to assess the stability impacts of your projects. I think, project managers are pretty practical, aren't they? You need to give them a tool. I mean, it's nice to give principles and indicators and say, well, there you put in the process, but give them a tool. So there's a little bit development on the tools, not enough. I think we need to develop a lot more there. The same group, Green Project Management, they have their, they call it P5, kind of assessment instrument based on a certain checklist we made 2010. We developed a maturity model for assessing sustainability in project management, a little bit more extensive and also a little bit more related to the context, the strategic context that we're working in, all very rudimentary. They give some kind of output, they give very compact output. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but it is something to look differently at your project. But they're coming probably to what we're also doing today. You can have all that, but I think for actions and behavior there's still a little bit more. There's something like beliefs and competences. I think that's what we're also talking about today. The beliefs, well, we made one paper on that, and that was based, sorry for switching to the other style now. That was based on a paper we had on UNOP last year, where we used three-way planned behavior, which says, okay, in order to have a certain behavior, there are three kind of beliefs that steer that behavior or influence that behavior. One is the attitudes. So what is the attitude of the project manager towards sustainability? Is kind of concerned about things, or is it something that just came about? One is the subjective norm. Subjective norm meaning the peer pressure that's put on the person, also influencing the behavior. And the other one is the perceived behavioral control. That has to do with, do we feel it actually makes a difference what we're doing? If we don't feel it makes a difference, we're probably not doing that. And we found out, we did a study basically finding different patterns in project managers. And so you see it a little bit here. And we found actually one group, I'll go over that, that's intrinsically motivated. So there are project managers, you could say, that are by nature green. They want to do the right thing. Right? They want to discuss sustainability because they feel it's the right thing to do. Great. There's also a group of project managers that says, if you want me to consider sustainability, tell me. So I'm looking at what my assignment is, typical project management behavior, I would say, and I'm doing that. So if you want me to consider sustainability, you have to put it in my assignment, and we call them task-driven. And there was a third group that's a little bit in between, that's very pragmatic, that says, well, if you want me to consider sustainability, I can do that as long as I see a benefit. And it's either my reputation, or it's the project success, or it's whatever, but I need to see effect. So we have an intrinsically driven group, we have a task-driven group, and we have a pragmatic group. So that's a little bit about the beliefs, because just having the tools and everything doesn't automatically mean that we're really doing that. I think there's still a lot more we can do here, and actually we are following up on that on some other research. And I think the competences, that's one of the things we want to talk about today and tomorrow also. We did some work on that, and that was based in a solid also in the materials as a classification framework for your literature that you looked at. We looked at education for sustainable development, and we found that it's a very developed field. There's lots of ideas on how we should educate people for sustainable development. And we said, well, can we look at those kind of competences? Because actually in that, we found this nice framework that we used in one of the publications, where they said if you want to train people for sustainable development or professionals, there are 5 types of competences. One, so this is a little bit the model, we need to understand that we need to change something. One, there is, let's say, a strategic competence that we understand how we can change to a more sustainable future. Okay, that requires certain system thinking and long-term perspective, and etc. There's also here the system thing that we understand that the complexity of the situations we're in. Anticipatory competence that we understand if we don't change anything, we're going off the cliff with each other. So we need to think ahead. There's a normative competence that we say, well, what's kind of right or wrong? I mean, in all discussion on sustainability and ethics and responsible, it's all, there will always comes some kind of normative aspect comes into place. It's not without values. And there's an interpersonal competence, and that's probably already very strong in project managers, that actually we can work with stakeholders and we can work with a team and we can work with a group to make things happen. Well, we should be able to do that. So we did in one of the publications, we did a little bit of mapping of the typical project management competence standards. At that time, that was IPMA ICD-3 on these 5 competences. Okay, so making sense of sustainable project management. If this is what we want, and of course, there are also some background things like the strategies of organizations and the values of an organization, and the values of society that we're living in and the culture. I think we need to work on all the things, and we see certain things more developed. Lots of stuff here. So this one, and some stuff here. This less developed. Competence less developed, instruments less developed, and also the beliefs behind it. And to finish this off, or to close this off, I'm going to go for this now. Sorry, we made a nice paper on the sustainability school of thinking, so we feel there's really something happening now. And I think projects now seen as the road to sustainability, which is actually coming now from the sustainability world, using project management as a way to sustainability. So, hey, that's cool. One thing I would like to, because that's coming back to the word responsible. And one of the things in sustainability is that we take a societal perspective on projects, where you could say the very old school was only look at the project, and then we had organizational project management, we looked at the project and the organization around it. And now we say societal project management, or the sustainability school of thinking, is looking at the project, the organization, and society. So looking at different levels of social systems. In a societal perspective, brings social responsibility. That was already published in 2009, model of CSR in project management. Okay. For example, climate change. So we take responsibility of some things that are happening in society. And I was struck by an article earlier this year, actually this year, January 2018, responsible forms of project management education. And that reflected on the principles of responsible management education. Have you ever heard of that? Probably, perhaps you are fine here. So that started 2007, I think. 60 business schools, 70 business schools sat together in a UN task force and signed the idea of principles of responsible management education. And what's done in that paper is looking at those principles and then applying that to project management and say, can we also formulate principles of responsible project management education? And that I needed to do some kind of research project on education. I thought that's pretty cool. So that for me is the and beyond also. But now you get two questions. Are we now talking about education for responsible project management? Or are we also talking about responsible education for project management? Now I know that's a little bit beyond the topic of today, but it relates to each other. And I think it's actually both. Because if you look at this, so this is PRIME, this UN task force, which is about developing the future business leaders of the world and doing it in a responsible way. It's actually both, so it's probably a little bit small for you to read, but it's about purpose and values and methods, but it's also the method and the partnership and the dialogue and the research. So it's partly content and partly also the way we educate people or educate our future leaders. And actually this paper takes a little bit more that educational route also. And the logic behind that, and it also is something perhaps to keep in mind, that we have projectification of society. I didn't pause by that too long, but projects are taking up 35% of economic activity at the moment, and that number is actually growing. We have tremendous issues in society, climate change, you can mention a couple of others. We have plurality of insights, so the school of thoughts, the idea that projects are either talking about making something or about changing something or about society or whatever. Really different views on projects. And what is our answer in society on explaining people what project management is? This. So we see this incredible complexity of projects that's important for society, and we have tremendous challenges. And we say, okay, now project management is just something you read out of a book that ends in 4 dummies. That's a little bit of frustration. I think we should do more on that. So let's say, based upon that, I'm now working on suggesting a set, and I'm looking at that publication, I'm looking at requirements, and can we suggest something that we would call what is now responsible project management education? So I added word education. That makes it a little bit tricky because it's responsible education of project management and responsible project management education, but okay. But perhaps today you can also take one look at that. I have a small poster that I can put on the wall somewhere that actually shows this. And I try to translate the idea of purpose and values and methods and research and partnerships, dialogue, also to project management education or project management. So yeah, I hope in a nutshell I've shown you something that's happening out there. Let's build a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Gilbert. There are some themes there that we'll be returning to, I'm sure.
I hope so.
The idea that project managers can do so much more, that seems to be a common theme that's coming out already. So, right. What we set up. Okay, so Rob Leslie Carter is going to join us, I hope, now online from somewhere in London, I imagine.
Do you need this further for the rest? Or
No,
you can take it off because he's on. Rob's going to present by Skype.
The future of project management, but there's some copies spread around and I've got more. We're keen to share this with you. What I loved about this, I don't know if anybody's ready for me.
Is there anybody there?
Yeah, hi Rob. Hi Rob, we're here. Hi Rob, we're here. Rob, good. You can hear me. Karen's just introducing you. I don't know if you can hear her.
Okay, are we ready?
Can you see my slides now?
I can see your slides, Rob.
Super.
I think everybody can see your slides. Can you see a bit of the room?
Well, I have to I have to scroll off, unfortunately, so I'll just have to take it as read.
You've got an audience. You're not presenting to an empty room. Trust us.
Great.
Right. So you want to
Rob Rob, do you briefly want to know roughly the sort of people who are in the room?
Yeah, go on.
Because
Okay,
we're in very
I'll
esteemed
tap across, see if I can see them. Hang on.
We're in very esteemed company today.
Okay. No, I don't know if your video's on, but it's fine.
We have
Okay.
practitioners from our program management office
Yes.
here. We have Professors Darren Dalcher and Gilbert Silvius has joined us. Who else? We've got a consultant from P Cubed, Rowan Mortby's here. Who else? We've got Gwyn Jones from the Association of Sustainability Practitioners. Anybody? And yeah, we've got a couple of one's a student who's currently on placement in our project management office, which we're excited to have here with us. And we've got Max with us, who graduates this year, and he's done a piece on kindness that he'll be talking about later. So anybody I've missed? No, okay. We've got Angela here from Hertfordshire University. Mehdi's an economist. He's here from the Department of Accounting, Finance, and AFE. What am I missing? AFE, Accounting, Finance and Economics here. So we've got a range of people in the room. So
Great.
is that good? Okay, off you go.
Okay, and just we're wrapping this session up about 10:45. So if I talk about 20 minutes and leave time for questions, does
That
that
would be
work?
great. Yes, thank you, Rob.
Okay, so hello everyone. Hopefully you can see me and the slides, or at least you can see the slides. I'm gonna, like I say, I've been talking quite a bit over the last 6 months about a piece of research that we've done, but part of that research has evolved really nicely into more of a conversation about responsible project management, emerging cultural change. So the idea of today is hopefully to provide a bit of context into where that research led us, but specifically into responsible project management, and then talk a little bit about what we're doing as an organisation just to start operationalising the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I guess you guys will be talking about a lot more over the next couple of days. So talk a quick introduction, bit about future trends that are driving change, but not the full remit of future trends that we covered in our research, but specifically ones that kind of lend themselves more to responsible project management. A bit about implementing the SDGs on projects, and then finishing off with how you guys can get involved with the ongoing scope of research that we're trying to do. Okay, I'm more than happy, by the way, as we go through for you guys to interrupt and ask questions. I've got a couple of slides just introducing me. So I work for Arup. Sounds like there's a few consultants in the room, so some of you will be familiar with Arup. I won't talk too much about the firm, but the Arup who set it up did a couple of very prescient, forward-looking things. As a leader of the organisation, first one, he set it up as employee-owned, so all those things that to do with kind of independence, freedom, and ability to be a bit more creative, maybe, and have a bit more focus on sustainability of the projects that we do, being able to sort of do the projects that we want to do rather than the projects that our shareholders want us to do, because we don't have any shareholders. The second one was he laid down a very good organisational culture. Which I won't talk about in much, but just the headlines. It's split into kind of the aims, what are we trying to achieve, the means, how we're going to get there, and the results and what that might mean. And the aims were just very much, let's do some good quality work, a bit of a focus on holistic design. The main means were getting some good people together, diverse membership, equality, and just sort of giving them the freedom to be creative and innovative. People often kind of say, just get good people and do what they want. Which is slightly challenging as a project manager in an organisation, and hopefully that will lead to some, a circular set of satisfied members, clients, and so on and so forth. And probably the most important of those being satisfied members. Now, one of the good things about being a project manager in a design organisation, if you like, first of all, it's challenging, I guess, because people literally turn up to work every day with a mantra of I want to do whatever the bloody hell I want to do, which is difficult when you're in that project management space. But they have a really good foresight, research, development arm. And there was a series of publications being developed, foresight by design, and then mostly about the kind of the future of physical stuff, built assets. So there's a real missing piece about the future of professional services, the future of project management, which is why we came up with this concept about a year ago of doing a piece of research around the future of project management, which I'm not going to talk about today, but some of you may have seen it, and I think Karen has got 30 odd copies. So Hopefully you can have a bit of a squizzle and perfect commuting fodder. You can do it front to back in about 45 minutes. But it looks at the trends and the drivers that we think are the most relevant to the way we deliver change through projects. So they're not just the macro global warming, urbanization trends, they're more project management specific. It sort of transports you into the future through some future client stories. So trying to really get you into that headspace of what future clients might be faced with regards to various project management topics, and then a bit about so what next. I'm just going to talk about 3 of the trends today, the ones that I think most nicely knit into responsible project management, and then we'll talk a little bit about the SDGs more specifically. So the first one of the 3 future trends driving change is a simple one to start with, diverse teams and organizations, and these all seem sort of tediously obvious now. Obviously there's the generational change thing. Quite often when I'm doing these talks, it's quite nice just to have a look at the different age demographics in the room. But my general kind of message here is that this is probably going to happen a little bit more quickly in terms of millennials and Gen Zs coming into leadership positions in project teams and project organizations. So I'm a Gen X. Now I've been kind of patiently waiting my turn for baby boomers to sort of start thinking about retirement, if that ever happens. But also very comfortable with the fact that actually I'm not the best. Our relationship with automation, or how we're going to really integrate supply chain all the way through to demand chain, through whatever it might be, intelligent blockchain contracts. If you're into construction, it's probably fully automated construction, 3D robotic printing, all those sorts of things. And increasingly, I guess, as project managers, how we use fully immersive technology and gamification to properly engage with stakeholders and present things in their most transparent and democratic way. So I'm very comfortable that, in 3 years' time, half of my workforce here and half my project teams are already going to be millennials, and by 2025 that's going to be more like 60–75%. The different routes and backgrounds is a much more interesting one. That's sort of the top right picture, is a picture of my 18-year-old daughter at a careers fair. And what was interesting, I was there not representing Arup, but representing engineering and architecture, and there was a number of different things. First of all, people were coming up to me without the traditional, maths, physics type degrees, but more business, DT, product design, lots of creative arts type backgrounds, and a far more of a relationship between creativity and design than sort of maths and logic and design that may have been the case 25 years ago. Also, it's interesting, this was a careers fair for academies, private schools, local comprehensives, a whole range of schools, and even the posh kids, as I would call them, coming up to me with their parents who presumably been paying school fees for them for the last 4 or 5 years, were talking about, well, maybe I'll go through an apprentice route. There's a real kind of open dialogue. There's no sort of stigma attached to this idea that apprentices are somehow people are going to be doing technician type work. It's a much more mature conversation now about, well, maybe I can not only avoid paying £60,000 to get myself through education, I can get someone to sponsor me, but I can also get on the job experience and hopefully get a degree course that's also a sort of a pathway to accreditation, be it to the Association for Project Management or whoever. But much more interesting. When my daughter, I'm a scientist, when she told me she was doing art, drama, and English, initially I was going, oh my God, what have I done wrong? But it was obviously she's doing what she loves doing. But it's really interesting. I went to open days with her a lot. She wants to do a degree called Games Art, which I didn't know anything about. It's a very new course, probably one of these courses that's got a much shorter shelf life than the courses in our era, in my era certainly. But some of the things that they're doing in that course is all about immersive environments, 3D technology, and not just creating virtual worlds, but really thinking about that user interface, how you can sort of gamify somebody's experience to come into a virtual platform, and you can help them navigate in directions that you want. Exactly the sort of thing that us as project managers are increasingly trying to persuade our clients to do in terms of that immersive technology stakeholder engagement piece. And the last one, this is just an interesting one that was presented at the World Economic Forum. Just in case you think that all the other bits of diversity are sorted, there's still an awful long way to go until even we get gender parity right in the workplace. So, I mean, some of the more emerging topics don't mean that we can forget about the more fundamental ones. The next one is more about open innovation and sharing. And this was a really popular trend, always is a really popular trend when I'm presenting normally 7 trends. I'm just going to talk about 3 today, about the way we deliver change through project management. And on its most basic level, it's, as this diagram shows, this concept of internal and external ideas being shared in industries that traditionally are very protectionist, particularly when it comes to things where there could be intellectual property. But this idea of collaborating, going into a shared R&D hopper to benefit from a broader set of ideas that both companies can engage with. And this is a much more mature in industries like automotive, in the automotive industry. So it's really interesting if you look at pictures of the Citroen C1, the Peugeot 107 and the Toyota Aygo. They are identical cars. And they've all been developed in collaboration between Citroen, Peugeot and Toyota. They're being marketed separately. They're a really nice idea of going to a whole load of R&D in a much more streamlined, efficient way and still being able to satisfy our individual customers. Innovation in the built environment sense and the project management sense is often described as doing more for less, always sort of squeezing more out of the process. An interesting other dimension to that is doing more for the benefit of more. And this concept of sharing and generosity is even more relevant, obviously, in the digital age. There was a good piece of work that was published on Design Buildings Wiki that some of you may have seen 6 months ago or so. It took a really comprehensive look at the way knowledge is being mapped across the UK construction industry, also how people are searching for knowledge, where they're finding knowledge, and how people are providing knowledge. And predictably, it found that the construction industry isn't particularly keeping pace with the post-internet age, which I think you could accuse a lot of industries of. But more interestingly, it was sort of saying anything, any information that was not easy to find, not easy to understand, and alarmingly for some people, behind any sort of paywall simply won't be read, even if it's vital information. And that's interesting when you think of academic providers, institutions like APM. APM have a mantra of wanting project management to be a life skill for all, which is a very magnanimous democratic statement. So kind of living up to that in terms of how they make some of their information available is quite interesting then. And you get into the realms there of sort of open source information. There's lots of open source software, Wikipedia, Linux, Creative Commons licenses, and it's more and more coming into open source hardware with things like WikiHouse, which is a good example that I'd encourage any of you to look at a really good TED talk by Alistair Parvin on WikiHouse, which is all about sort of democratizing, in this case, the process of architecture, which you can apply very much to the concept of project management as well. I'm racing a little bit because of the time. The third one, and the one we'll spend more time on, is changing corporate culture. So undoubtedly, when APM did a vote of which of these 7 trends do people relate to most, this one came out top. And this is a little bit related to the previous 2. It's, the social and environmental agenda that's forcing fundamental changes to business strategy, if you like, and you can recognise it on a political level as well. So when Donald Trump makes post-Charlottesville remarks, Donald Trump's business councils disband, not necessarily, if I'm being cynical, because they don't want to be associated with the leader of the free world, but because their customers, their client base now demand a higher level of accountability to all of those firms. And it's really kind of, do you associate with this message or do you not associate with this message? So you see it happening in a way that 10 years ago I could see myself maybe in my organisation occasionally sort of going, we're just the project managers, we're not the client, we're not the political decision makers in this instance, but far more we're all being held sort of accountable and to be pushed into making our own ethical decisions. So if you want a sort of another way of looking at it would be, what do you want your own legacy to be? Now, sorry, just jumping back, this strap line here, shaping a better world, reshape a better world, it just happens to be Arup's strap line. And actually, it could be anyone's strap line. I think Bouygues, a French contractor, have got an identical one, reshape a better world. And it's a little bit meaningless because a better world to a colleague of mine in the Sydney office might mean not getting involved in correctional facilities or not getting involved in casinos, whereas a colleague of mine in our Los Angeles office, 80% of their work might be in building sustainable casino development. So they might be trying to influence betterness in a slightly different way. Anyway, it was very context specific. So what was interesting last year was that the board of Arup decided to codify that word better in Reshape a Better World by aligning with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that's partly meaningfully contributing to sustainable development, but also definitely making ourselves more accountable. So, shaping a better world, though these SDGs to us are describing what better looks like. So they align fairly well with the aims of the firm, if you can remember some of the philosophical pieces I started with at the beginning. And it's interesting actually that the messaging internally is very much that this isn't a nice thing to do that'll make us feel better about ourselves. It's also a business opportunity. And I think that's a kind of an interesting, it feels like it takes the sort of softness and the sort of the niceness out of it in a way, but I think it's important that as well as doing the right thing, this makes sense, and it's something that we can sell to our clients and sell to our organizations and our project teams as something that ultimately will have a business benefit as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Sustainable Development Goals, but the concept is that they're global commitments. They've been made by every single nation in the world, and progressively they're going to start increasingly defining government policy and investments, the markets we work in. At the moment, they're fairly high level, but we'll talk a little bit about how they're gradually percolating down into things that can define the way we operate as businesses, as project organizations, and its project teams. So yeah, the kind of the why would anyone want to be project managed by you is maybe the sort of the closing mantra in that. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, and all I can do at the moment is talk about a little bit about what we're doing at Arup. And to be honest, I'm not an expert on the Sustainable Development Goals. There's probably only a month ago an internal awareness training program was launched within Arup. There's just been a sort of a leadership get together last week in Boston just to start thinking a little bit more about how we can implement the SDGs across all our projects, across our reporting, across our decision making. I think that's to really operationalize it. You've got to be thinking every time you think, am I going to get involved in this project or not? Those critical go, no go decisions. If part of that decision making isn't the usual, do I know the client? Am I going to make a reasonable margin? Am I competing against 1 or 2 people or 20 people? Actually, we've now got to start kind of saying, does it satisfy some of these SDGs? Is it the sort of project that I want to be working on? Okay, so as I say, we internally at Arup have just started really rolling out awareness internally, and it's at its very early stages. But you guys will hopefully have some basic understanding from some of the pre-reading that's been sent out, and some of you will know a lot more about it than I do. But 17 specific goals, but underpinned by set targets, 169 targets in total. So there's a lot in there, and sort of encourage all of you in between your sessions or this evening or whatever, just to spend a bit of time looking at them and sort of finding out what they mean to you. And already the indicators have been proposed to monitor progress at a national level, which is great. And there are initiatives underway to identify how that can be used for cities, for businesses, for projects, etc. So there's a bit of sort of watch this space, but we're already internally trying to kind of work out our own ways updating our own reporting, for example, to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's similar kind of triple bottom line reporting, but aligned in a slightly different way. So you will probably have seen, if I can scroll across to this, so the UN website, lots of information about the Sustainable Development Goals, which I can sort of scroll around, and so all of the 17 goals are there. If you go into one, I'll sort of click on Sustainable Cities, hopefully it's working. So they're all presented exactly the same way. And if you drill into one of these, you know, they're identical. So you've got your icon, which is your overall goal. You've got some text to the right of it, which is more of a, you know, a call to action. So goal 11, and all of these call to actions, you'll notice they start with a verb. So it's make cities inclusive. You know, so every single word in this has been painstakingly negotiated. Every single word is important. So the fact that all of these call for action lines start with a verb is very clear. It's not a passive thing. It's something that everyone wants to get involved with. So the paragraph below all of these puts it into a bit of context, why it's important. And if you scroll down, so I've got a touch screen, you can get the idea. You've got 3 more tabs down at the bottom. You've got the facts and figures that kind of put it into scale and the need for action. So, you know, obvious ones here: the world's cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's land, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption, 75% of carbon emissions. This is starting to put it into context for people. If you go into the targets, goal 11, I think there's 10 targets. And this is when it starts to become, these are the targets that underpin the goals. It starts to become clearer how we, as organisations, project teams, can start to contribute. And this might be by the sort of projects that we get involved with. You know, it might be about kind of waste management, air quality, or whatever it might be. But also, there's things in here about how we can contribute through in-kind work or investments, those sorts of things. So if you're going to, the entry level definitely for getting your head around the sustainable development goals is to go straight into these targets. There's 169 of them, but they start to make a lot more tangible sense. And the third tab on here is links. So for that particular sustainable development goal, a whole load of useful links, and each one's got this sort of blue rectangle. If you click on there, you get a quite interesting sort of booklet, which again just goes into a little bit more detail about that particular goal, why it's important, and gives you some case studies and so on before. Okay, so I'll just go back into the. So yeah, it's, you know, the important things to remember here is that they've taken a long time to get right, so it's quite a good thing for companies to embrace. Like, all 193 countries adopted them, and 215. Well worth looking into detail. So they build on things that you've heard of, but you may not necessarily have tracked, like the Millennium Development Goals, Paris Climate Pledge, the New Urban Agenda, all of those sorts of things. And hopefully one of the things you'll be covering in your couple of days, or something you can do in your own time, is sort of, you know, figuring out in your mind what the development goals are and what they're trying to achieve, what's most important to you personally, and the work that you do, and at least knowing where to go to find more information. Here are some examples of how we are already starting to report our projects against their contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. So some of them are predictably developing country projects, but you know, I put a couple up here. This is one. This is a US buildings related one, and he's looked at, you know, how's this contributing to SDG 12, SDG 8, you know, SDG 11.5, and I noticed Mott McDonald, interesting enough, are now starting to report at a company level against these SDGs. So this is going to start happening more and more in an interesting way that I think a lot of our professional bodies and a lot of our institutions will start thinking about how they can report in a similar sort of way. Which brings me on, I suppose, to, I've got a couple of slides that are APM specific. I don't know if Casper is there. He was talking about possibly coming, but APM are in an interesting place because they've just launched their Chartered Qualification. It's the Association for Project Management, if people are unfamiliar with the acronym APM. So you can now become a Chartered Project Professional at CHPP. So all of those good things about putting project management as a profession on the map, credibility, something that people can aspire to be and work towards a profession in its own right, are all really important. They have a code of professional conduct which has recently been updated, but probably like a lot of professional bodies, they stop short of talking about the sort of projects that we as project managers should be getting involved with. So a quote from that code is, professional ethical behaviour is about doing things right, so it complies with the norms of ethical behaviour and public interest, such that it couldn't necessarily withstand intense public scrutiny. And I think that probably does cover a multitude of sins, but it's a slight nuance, I think, between doing things right, managing a questable project in a very professional way, and thinking about doing the right things, thinking of kind of taking a step back and saying, what are the right kind of projects to do? There's a really good APM white paper that I point you all to by one of the professors in strategic projects at UCL, Effie Constantinou, who I'm sure some of you will know. She did a white paper as part of the build-up to chartership, which a lot of people sort of just kind of saw it as the case of millennials and sort of thought, well, this is a generational thing, but actually the depth of this white paper is all about professional responsibilities and obligations. So this is Googleable. And she talks really profoundly in this white paper about 3 ways that project managers can still be fundamentally irresponsible. And it goes right to the heart of all the things that appeal to me about doing the right kind of projects, the right kind of things. So the first one, political irresponsibility, like not knowing what's happening, the context, the time and the place, the environment that you're making project decisions in. So everything you're doing sort of decontextualized, and you can hardly claim as a practitioner to be acting responsibly in that situation. The second one is intellectual irresponsibility, a popular thing these days in sort of claiming, in the post-expert era, not knowing any different when you lack, as a profession, sort of an in-depth understanding of maybe your practice. So you're only doing what has always been done before. You're susceptible to the one way of doing things, and you're less confident, I suppose, to sort of innovate or feel comfortable diverging from what you might think is an established way of doing things. And the last one, moral irresponsibility, which I hope is less common, but simply not knowing the difference between right or wrong. But it happens a lot when, as practitioners, we commodify our skills. We're just applying process, even with questionable or unethical purposes. So all of these things are quite good examples. So as the summary in the white paper is that as project managers, we need to consider the ethical implications of our work, because until we do so, we can't claim to hold the responsibility and accountability for our projects. And if you're anything like me and you're involved in projects, that sort of authorship, that sort of feeling that you're making a difference, you're influencing, you're challenging, you're shaping, is one of the really important reasons for getting involved in the work we get involved with. So that's just to kind of finish off. Just that's a couple of chapters extracted that started off being part of this future of project management piece of research. So those ones have sort of grown in their own little way, this sort of responsible project management way, which actually are probably the bit that excites me the most. We are trying to make future project management an ongoing living initiative, by the way. So some of you have spoken to about it before in a bit more detail, but we started off, if you think of this as a clock, that's 11 o'clock. So we published this green book. You can see it. I'm going to call it a book. Lots of jokes there about how actually it's a pamphlet, but we published that book a year ago, and we've really worked hard to get it out there. It's difficult to see the key, but this is a map that shows, the very dark blue, where we got contributors from for the publication. So it's, it's not owned by Arup, APM, UCL. It's very much something we reached out to the global project management community. It's not UK centric. It's something where we've got global contributions from. The kind of the mid blue is the case studies, which again are taken from all over the world, and presentations are being done everywhere as well. So they're not being done by me. They're done by a number of colleagues in various different countries around the world and regions around the world have been picking them up and presenting them. I have done quite a lot around the UK because I just quite enjoy going out and meeting new people and deliberately engaging, particularly with universities. If you get round to 3 or 4 o'clock, the idea of this of trying to present to people in that sort of October, November, December, maybe January window is to try and catch universities in their research dissertation cycles. So the idea is if we can present this is where we think the industry might be going, that it just sparks a bit of a different thought process. So rather than maybe doing a bit of research on, here's a collection of current ideas, people are being tempted to push themselves a little bit more into plausible futures and hopefully push the knowledge base a little bit of the future of project management a little bit forward. And we're in conversations with APM to try and make a future thinking award as part of their annual November awards. So there's a bit more of a pull for people doing research, dissertation, whatever, to feed into that award process. I think it's someone from PQube was there, so I think they are current project management company of the year. So this is a great opportunity for companies that are sort of forward thinking to also think how can we innovate, how can we spend a bit more time just thinking a bit more progressively outside the immediacy of project cycles, and hopefully feed into this process. Like I say, it's a very much a commons piece of work. And that's it really. If you want to get involved, by the way, you can search this green book, just search Future of Project Management, download it, read it, forward it around. We tend to collate a whole load of project management related futurism at Foresight FOPM. There's a lot of good stuff out there, TED Talks, blogs, YouTube, you name it. A lot of good sort of Twitter feeds. But I collate it, and a couple of other people when they can be bothered collate it on at Foresight FOPM. So it's a good shortcut if you want to kind of see some more project management related futurism tweets. And yeah, when people kind of say what next, the main thing is just once you've embraced the whole future of work thing, future of project management thing, and thought about it in a deeper way, just take a step back and see how you can apply it to your day-to-day work. I've managed to unlock a whole load of things at work these days just by sort of thinking to myself, well, what directions is likely to be going in 5 or 10 years time? And that often helps people kind of veer on one side or another. Another thing I'd sort of recommend, it's a bit more of maybe a futuristic mindset, is to often sort of when people are sort of a little bit hesitant about trying something new, just challenge them with phrases like, let's give it a go. People can be slightly conservative and factory type based in their decision making, but encourage them to be maybe a bit more experimental, more laboratory type based, and sort of let's give it a go, let's fail fast, let's give people a bit more autonomy to go out and express themselves and try a few different things. Really is where people want to be in terms of being given some space to be creative and to learn. And yeah, if you want to do some research that's a bit more future thinking, then I'm more than happy to speak to any of you in a bit more detail. So get in touch with me anytime. So I hope that has provided, a hopefully not too long bit of context about where we are. And more than happy to take any questions. I might tab off this so I can hopefully see your camera now. I can't see your camera, that's fine.
Thank you, Rob. That was brilliant. Can we just thank Rob? Okay, questions.
Can you turn your camera on at your end, or is it?
We're trying to figure out what went wrong. I think I don't know if the live streaming devices hijacked the camera. Let's find out. Let's see. Okay, Panopto's camera is on. This one isn't. Let's see. I can't do that. All right, let me stop Panopto for a bit.